On a sunny and beautiful day, a father and his son stood atop a hill, observing workers cutting down trees below. The father turned to his son and asked a thought-provoking question: "What, in your opinion, is the most crucial virtue for a lord?" The son, filled with curiosity and uncertainty, was surprised by this unexpected query. He hesitantly responded, suggesting that generosity might be the key virtue. The father nodded approvingly, acknowledging that it was not a bad answer. The son, still puzzled, inquired about the correct answer. The father explained that the most important virtue for a lord is having a kind and warm heart. The son sought further clarification, asking if his father believed he possessed such a heart. The father went on to clarify that the virtue required of a lord varies depending on the circumstances. A lord must be adaptable, sometimes a friend, a family member, or even a villain. The son must learn to embody these roles and always strive to do his best. By doing so, he can build alliances with anyone he encounters in life. Their conversation was abruptly interrupted by a laborer running towards them with a request. The worker apologized for the interruption and asked the lord if he could perform a specific task. Richard, the father, readily agreed, but first, he requested his son, Simon, and the laborer, Charles, to step aside. With a sigh of relief, the tired laborer and Simon moved away. The lord extended his hand and began to cast a spell. Simon watched in admiration as Richard summoned a portal from which waves of dark magic surged, covering the ground in front of him. Where the magic touched the earth, it began to seethe and bubble. From this bubbling liquid, skeletal hands emerged, and within seconds, nearly a dozen full-length skeletons rose with the characteristic sound of bones clattering. The skeletons turned their attention to Simon and the laborer, grinning. The worker pointed towards a pile of large trunks that the laborers had felled earlier. They carefully examined the worker's gesture and then the indicated trunks, proceeding to move them to their designated location. In no time, they began to complete the trunks to the joyful applause of the grateful worker, who was relieved to take a break. He loudly thanked the foreman, who assured him there was no issue with expressing gratitude as long as the worker continued to work hard. Simon felt a sense of pride in his father's abilities as a skilled necromancer, enabling him to assist his workers using skeletons. A brief digression follows, recounting the history of necromancers in this world. Necromancers are unique spellcasters who harness dark magic to summon and revive long-dead creatures. In a past era, an emperor in the world of Fern sought to eliminate necromancers to secure his rule. He dispatched a massive army of 50,000 soldiers known as the Rose Brigade. However, 10 skilled necromancers in the city of Kizan resisted the emperor's forces, turning the entire brigade into undead soldiers. This marked the beginning of the empire's downfall. In retaliation, necromancers transformed the arrogant emperor into an undead ruler, ending his reign in a macabre fashion. A new era of necromancer rule commenced, as they conquered half of the continent without substantial opposition. Yet, another force, the priests, served the goddess deity and threatened necromancer dominance over the other half of the continent. A fragile peace existed between these two opposing forces on the continent, but in their domain, workers and the undead cooperated harmoniously under the Lord's guidance. This harmony extended to the town of Lil, where humans and undead worked well together, utilizing necromancer powers for the greater good. On the map, it was inconspicuous, surrounded by large cities and castles, with neighboring villages unaware of its existence. The central character, Simon, was the heir to this domain and destined to become its lord. He was a young and joyful boy, and his father believed he had a promising future ahead. Simon was to attend the Academy of Necromancers, poised to become a brilliant necromancer himself. After assisting his father, Simon returned home to their modest yet charming lord's house. His mother, Anna Felina, eagerly welcomed him back. Simon shared that he had been helping with the logs. Simon then went over to the stove, where his mother mentioned that he must be hungry, but he should wait a bit. Intrigued, he inquired about the dish she was preparing, which was water infused with larca mushrooms. These mushrooms appeared perilous at first glance, and Simon expressed concern about their poisonous nature. However, his mother assured him not to worry, she would make them edible with her magic. She began using her bright light magic to transform the brew, leaving Simon in awe of the holiness of her magic. Anna was a former priest, and her power demonstrated her background. Whenever Simon witnessed her abilities, he wondered how his parents, who were seemingly complete opposites, had met. He imagined their happy days together, but his thoughts were interrupted when his mother urged him to stop staring at the mushrooms and asked why he wasn't eating. Simon couldn't disagree, so he walked over to the table, laden with a variety of tasty and aromatic dishes. They waited for his father to join them and began their meal together. Simon ate very little, and his mother noticed, inquiring if he was feeling unwell. Meanwhile, his father seemed to devour everything with remarkable vigor. Later in the afternoon, as Simon was about to retire to his room, he observed his mother applying a cucumber face mask to his father. Watching them, it appeared as though they were still on their honeymoon, radiating happiness. That evening, Simon gazed at the full, beautiful moon from his room. After bidding goodnight to his parents and closing the door to his room, a letter suddenly flew in and adhered to his face, startling him. He removed the letter, wondering about its contents. When he turned toward the window, he spotted a girl sitting there, as if appearing out of thin air, and she greeted him with a smile, leaving Simon pleasantly surprised. With a smile on her face, the surprised Simon felt a bit apprehensive and remained silent. He turned away without responding, as if he hadn't seen anything. He considered it might be a hallucination or a dream, deciding to lie down on his bed and try to fall asleep. However, the persistent girl wasn't willing to give up. She leaped into the room, screaming at him not to pretend he couldn't see her. Despite Simon ignoring her, she continued to insist. She claimed to know he could see her and started tugging at his blanket, urging him to get up. Both of them engaged in a brief tug-of-war over the blanket. Simon realized that neither of them would relent, and he let out a tired sigh. He finally sat down on the bed and inquired about her identity, how she had arrived, and whether she was lost. Annoyed, the girl assured him she wasn't lost and bluntly called him stupid. She confidently stated that she was here to see him, Simon Felina, pointing directly at him. Surprised, Simon asked how she knew his name, and she began explaining about the letter. Just then, Simon's parents heard the strange commotion in his room and rushed in, concerned about a possible intruder. Clad in their pajamas and armed with a frying pan and a rolling pin, they appeared somewhat comical and intimidating. However, the girl, who was already seated on Simon's bed, greeted them cheerfully by name, recognizing Richard and Anna. They, in turn, recognized her as Naftis and were delighted to see her. She explained that she hadn't changed, and they all expressed how much they had missed one another. Simon's parents instructed him to introduce himself politely to the legendary Naftis Archbold, and he began to grasp the significance of what he had been told. He looked at her with disbelief, wondering if she could truly be Naftis Archbold, the same witch who had made the Emperor of the Third Empire her undead puppet and had lived for over 300 years. She confirmed that she was indeed the same Naftis Archbold of Kizan. Excited, Simon began to connect the dots and realized that the letter he had received might hold the key. He retrieved the letter from its envelope and began to read. It was indeed an invitation, explaining that Naftis had a formal proposal to make. The letter informed him that he had been accepted to study at the Necromancer Academy in Kien due to his exceptional potential. After reading the letter, Naftis extended her hand, inviting him to come to Kien. She bid him farewell, assuring him they would meet again in Kien, and then disappeared into the moonlight. Left to contemplate the rustling breeze and the moonlight that enveloped him, Simon's thoughts were interrupted by his father's request to see the letter. Richard wanted to examine it thoroughly because he was concerned about his son, though he had always known this day would come sooner or later. Simon agreed and quickly handed the letter to his father. Richard began to read it aloud, but Simon interrupted him with a question. He asked his father what the letter meant when it referred to Kien. His father began to explain that Kien was the central hub of the Dark Alliance and the headquarters of the necromancers. It also served as a school for the education of young necromancers. The chancellor of this school in Kien was Naftus, the same person Simon had just seen. Simon, incredulous, asked if she was the chancellor, but his father reminded him that looks could be deceiving. Simon had numerous questions and didn't know where to start. His first inquiry was about the location of Kien and whether it was far from their home. His father delved into old memories and responded that Kien was indeed quite distant. Kien was situated on an island called Arok, which could only be reached by a ship departing from Langaren, the capital of the Kingdom of Dresden. Once on the ship, one had to sail for a considerable time to reach the correct island. However, Richard assured him not to worry, as there were many interesting and enjoyable things to do in Langaren. Arok itself was incredibly beautiful, and Kizan was known for its distinctive uniforms worn by its residents. Simon was taken aback by the mention of uniforms and asked what was going to happen. His mother explained that it would keep him occupied until the initiation ceremony began. His father assured him that there was much to prepare and do to become a necromancer. Simon needed to study diligently at school to acquire the necessary skills. However, first, they were going to unlock his core. When his mother inquired if his father wanted to teach their son a bit of black magic, Richard enthusiastically agreed. He also advised Simon to learn proper breathing techniques, as he shouldn't expect to sleep until the next day. There was much to be done, and Simon was overwhelmed with both joy and confusion, unsure of how to express his feelings to his parents. He was breathless with anticipation for the upcoming journey. After his encounter with Naftus that day, Simon embarked on the busiest week of his life, filled with numerous preparations. There were numerous preparations to make for Kizan. Simon's parents spoke highly of the school and assured him that he would have a great time there. However, the sudden news of their son's departure did cause them some worry. Simon's father continued to instruct him, mentioning that some spells might be painful, but he needed to be patient. Simon endured the pain and gave his best effort for 3 consecutive days. During that week, he didn't sleep at all, as he worked on forming the core with his father's guidance. After the grueling hours of core formation, the remainder of the day was dedicated to learning breathing techniques and participating in a crash course in black magic, taught by his father. 1 week later, the boy who had never left his hometown of Les Hill and had spent his entire life there set off on a journey. He was accompanied by all the household servants, his mother, and his father. His mother had tears in her eyes and asked them to be cautious, while the servants expressed their concerns and wished them a safe journey. This marked the beginning of their departure to Kizan. As they traveled some distance, Simon's father continued his lessons in black magic. He advised Simon to draw magical power from the surrounding environment, which permeated the air, and to gradually learn to control the mana within. Simon focused intently on the process. The blue energy began to envelop him from all sides as he drew energy into his core. His father guided him to direct the mana to flow through his hands, which he successfully achieved. He allowed the mana to flow through his fingers, with streams of blue drops cascading from his fingertips. Impressed, his father praised him as a quick learner. He went on to explain that the source of a necromancer's power lay in darkness. Simon examined a dark blue drop on his finger while his father clarified the key distinction between an ordinary magician and a necromancer. Mana was a gaseous substance, making it less dense and susceptible to dispersion in the air. Darkness, on the other hand, was more akin to solids or liquids, making it easier to bind and shape. He demonstrated this by molding it into a miniature doll on his hand, resembling Simon's mother with a frying pan and spatula. Simon was captivated by this skill, but his father continued to elaborate. Those who practiced and honed their skills in controlling power based on darkness were called necromancers. He clenched his fist, shattering the miniature doll. Given their limited time, he suggested that Simon focus on the fundamentals of channeling darkness into his core. Simon agreed and began gathering darkness on his hands. Initially, it was just a few drops, but through diligence, he managed to form a substantial pool of darkness. He then began shaping something that resembled hair from a distance, but his creation turned unstable and liquid as expected, spreading all over his hands, unable to hold its form. Simon's father observed his efforts with a smile, deeply impressed and surprised. Typically, it took about 6 months to 2 years to learn how to create objects using darkness, but Simon progressed rapidly and achieved it in just 3 days. After a few attempts, he managed to create a stable structure adorned with flowers and a bird. While Simon was busy crafting, his father contemplated his son's exceptional talent. He knew Simon was talented, but he didn't anticipate such extraordinary progress. It usually took years to achieve what Simon had done in days. His father hoped that this talent would lead Simon down a different path, avoiding the mistakes he had made in his youth. Meanwhile, Simon presented his creation to his father, a dark blue fire he named Midnight Glow, a unique type of fire. His father remarked thoughtfully on the beautiful shade of blue in Simon's darkness. Excited, Simon inquired if the color of his darkness, this midnight blue, was a good thing, whether it was a rare shade for necromancers, and if it indicated talent. His father responded with a smile, stating that it was just a color and didn't impact anything. Upon hearing this, Simon's enthusiasm waned, and his spark dimmed. Their carriage eventually halted with a squeak of wheels, and the driver informed them that they had reached their destination. His father explained that they were at the border of the Kingdom of Dresden and that Simon had to continue without him. This news saddened Simon, and he asked for clarification. His father expressed his regrets and mentioned that due to ancient events, he couldn't enter the territory of the Kingdom of Dresden. It was a long story, but Simon had to understand that he should think and decide for himself in every situation. Simon was bewildered by this revelation, but his father assured him not to worry, affirming his confidence that Simon would navigate everything ahead better than anyone else. He expressed his pride in having such a remarkable son. As Simon's carriage departed, his father stood on the road, watching it carry his son toward a new life, wishing him good luck and a safe journey. 1 week later, Simon was on the road to the Kingdom of Dresden. He finally arrived in the capital, which resembled a city from the late Middle Ages. However, as he entered the city, it became clear that it was far from ordinary. In the bustling crowd of people, there were no less, and perhaps even more, skeletons. These skeletal figures weren't limited to humans, other creatures were represented as well. Langeron, the capital, was a breathtaking city, unlike anything Simon had ever seen before. Its grand architecture and vibrant crowds left him awestruck. He quickly realized that this city was immense, and he needed to be cautious as he navigated through it. Anxious, he kept looking back and clutched a leaflet with the address of his destination, 239, Camel Road, Langeron. The conductor would be awaiting him there. However, the street he was on remained unknown to him, so he decided to ask some of the people in the crowd for directions. Simon couldn't help but notice the beauty of the city. As Simon navigated through the crowd, he noticed a striking young woman and approached her, politely asking for help to find his way. However, when she turned to face him, it was revealed that one of her eyeballs dangled on a muscle and hung at the level of her chin. Unfazed by her unusual appearance, she politely inquired how she could assist him. Simon found himself in an uncomfortable position, struggling to suppress the urge to run away or pull back, as that would be rude. He managed to stammer out a question about the address written on the note. With trembling hands, he handed her the note, and she leaned in to examine it with her abnormal eyes, making him even more nervous. Thankfully, she quickly provided directions. She mentioned that she knew where Camel Road was and pointed to a square further up the street. She instructed him to walk across the square, turn right, and there, he would find a street covered with gilded tiles, which would be Camel Road, one of Langeron's famous landmarks. Simon was relieved to learn that it wasn't far away and politely thanked the unusual young lady. She appreciated his polite behavior and referred to him as a polite boy, offering him wishes of safety and good luck with his endeavors in Langeron. Simon reciprocated the good wishes and hurried toward the square through the bustling crowd. Unbeknownst to Simon, as soon as he distanced himself from the lady, a secretive man who had blended into the crowd approached her. He began asking her questions and, with his charisma, requested a favor. Simon remained oblivious to this interaction as he carefully reviewed his note on his way to the square. Meanwhile, the person who was supposed to meet Simon had grown impatient and wondered why he was taking so long. She speculated whether he might have lost his way. Simon's situation would soon take a turn for the worse as he found himself in an alley, surrounded by a gang of robbers who demanded that he surrender everything he had. They ordered him to throw his bag, clothes, and all his possessions on the ground, and they laughed at the apparent foolishness of this newcomer to town. Simon realized that he had let his father down and was now facing a difficult situation. He anticipated that he might arrive in Kien later than expected. We now rewind the story by an hour to understand how he ended up in this predicament. In the midst of his troubles, Simon found himself on Camel Road, scanning the house numbers. Suddenly, a young man approached him and inquired if he was heading to 239 Camel Road. Simon's excitement grew, thinking that this person might be the guide mentioned in the note. The man confirmed that he was indeed his guide and explained that he had come to find him because he hadn't arrived at the address on time. He assumed that Simon might have gotten lost and had been searching for him. Simon eagerly shook the man's hand, expressing his delight at meeting him. He introduced himself as Simon Fenna. The man, introducing himself as Rowley, the Langeron guide, invited Simon to follow him. He would lead him to his accommodation. During their journey, the guide shared that he was relieved to have found Simon before he ran into trouble, as the city was full of potential risks, including pickpockets, muggers, and overpriced vendors. Simon's keen senses began to raise questions, sensing something was amiss. Seeing Simon's skeptical expression, the guide clarified that he was referring to the various risks in the city, but Simon wasn't fooled. He astutely pointed out that the guide had been constantly checking his lower vest pocket, suggesting he was armed with a knife. The guide was taken aback by the boy's observations and made excuses, claiming it was all for self-defense and there had been a misunderstanding. However, Simon didn't let up and further noted that he knew the name of a goat living in Lille, implying that the guide's cover was blown. At this revelation, the guide's faade began to crumble, and he revealed his true intentions. He pulled a knife from his pocket, signaling to his accomplices who swiftly surrounded Simon, ready to confront him. He swore at Simon, claiming it didn't matter who he was, and that he would soon be begging for mercy. He demanded that Simon put everything he had on the ground, including his bag and clothes. However, Simon remained calm and refused, despite being surrounded by the robbers. One of the robbers, brandishing a knife, threatened Simon, remarking that he couldn't quite see the entire picture. Simon made a swift movement and asked if it appeared that he couldn't see anything. In a fit of anger, the robber lunged at Simon with the knife, ready to attack. However, Simon skillfully dodged the attack and prepared for a counterattack. He swiftly grabbed the attacker's wrist, causing him to drop his knife with a loud crunch as the bone broke. This unexpected turn of events left the other robbers shocked. Simon scolded them for being scammers who preyed on innocent people, falsely claiming to offer protection and other deceptions. He declared it his duty as the heir to the Lord to rid the world of such filth. When the robbers learned of his noble status, they were even more determined to confront him. Their leader, Riley, called for reinforcements. At that moment, a beautiful black-haired girl with gold earrings adorned with rubies appeared in the alley. She expressed relief at finally finding Simon, explaining that she had been searching for him since he hadn't arrived as expected. Riley, irritated, asked what the girl wanted. She explained that they were dealing with trivial matters and suggested he consider the situation carefully. However, as the girl spoke, the wall of a nearby house began to crumble, and skeletons emerged from within, causing panic among the bandits. They shouted in fear as they realized they were facing a necromancer. The girl instructed the skeletons to attack the robbers, who couldn't escape. The skeletons showed no mercy and paid no heed to the robbers' pleas for forgiveness. Riley, bewildered by the sight of the skeletons, was filled with fear for his life. He frantically apologized and begged for mercy. The girl inquired about his clan, and Riley stated they were from the Claven clan. Unimpressed, the girl questioned why a member of such a prestigious clan would resort to robbing innocent tourists. "Let me go and explain to the clan leader myself," Riley pleaded with desperation in his voice. The girl, unyielding, ordered one of the skeletons to force Riley to put his head on the ground with his hands behind his back. He was to crawl to the city guard headquarters and confess his crimes. Riley, still begging for mercy, received a stern response from the girl, who questioned if mercy was her command. She warned him that any deviation would result in dire consequences for his entire clan in the name of Kizan. Simon watched the scene unfold behind the girl, who was in control of the situation. When the skeletons escorted the robbers away, the girl, now calming down, identified herself as his true guide. She swiftly took his hand and led him along, mentioning that her mother was waiting for them. Upon arrival, the girl's mother was not present, and they started searching for her. They found her near an ice cream cart, where she had accidentally covered herself in ice cream, resulting in a minor mishap. The girl reprimanded her mother for not heeding her instructions to stay put, and her mother, in turn, made excuses, justifying her actions. The girl emphasized the potential consequences had they lost Simon due to her mother's behavior. Simon watched this family squabble and was surprised to discover that the girl's mother was Nephthys, not her younger sister, as he had initially assumed. In the midst of their quarrel, Nephthys reassured Simon that he had likely learned something valuable from his father during their journey. Simon confirmed this and decided to demonstrate what he had learned. He ignited his midnight blue fire. Both girls watched in awe as the fire swirled like real flames. Nephthys noted that she hadn't seen such a shade of darkness in a while but observed that it still exhibited mana-like properties, given its gaseous state. She expressed confidence that Simon would further develop his core manipulation skills at the school. Simon felt reassured that there was nothing to worry about, and the trio continued on their way. After Nephthys expressed her confidence in her daughter, Lorraine, she asked Lorraine to be Simon's guide. Though Lorraine wasn't initially thrilled with the idea, she accepted the responsibility. Lorraine introduced herself to Simon, grabbing his hand and informally initiating their partnership. She explained that she was a student at K's, just like him. Lorraine cheerfully informed Simon that the most exciting moment of the school year was when students bought their uniforms, notebooks, textbooks, and supplies before the school term began. She emphasized the thrill of this moment and suggested he should enjoy it. They headed to the bookstore together, and Lorraine offered to help him choose his textbooks. Excited about the new experience, Simon agreed. However, as the books flew towards him, he was startled by their weight and the heavy workload. He looked at the first book, titled Introduction to Smani by Elmore Trinell, with concern. Lorraine reassured him that he wouldn't have to study all these subjects in the first year. As Lorraine went to get the last book, Dynamics of Darkness, Simon contemplated the prospect of meeting so many people his age and his future life at school. Suddenly, a girl with pink hair appeared and ran into him, causing her to crash into a shelf of books. The shelf wobbled, and books started to fall. Simon quickly covered her with his body to protect her from the falling books. Apologetic, the girl thanked him, and they introduced themselves. The girl, named Cindy Vivace, was also a new student at Kin. Simon, introducing himself as Simon Fenna, reassured her that they were in the same boat. Cindy, coming from a remote northern town, was looking forward to making new friends at the school. Simon assured her that she wasn't alone, and they continued to bond over their shared experience. Simon was delighted to discover that Cindy didn't have any friends at the school yet either. Cindy's eyes lit up in disbelief, and she started to ask if it would be okay for her to. But she paused mid-sentence. Finally, she made up her mind and asked if it would be all right for her to greet him at school. Simon happily agreed, telling her he was going to ask her the same thing. As they finished putting their books away, Cindy mentioned she had to run because her father was waiting for her. Simon assured her that he'd eagerly await their meeting at school. As Cindy was about to leave, Simon stopped her and asked if she could return his wallet. She was caught off guard but not upset. Cindy had used spiritual magic to steal the wallet and was surprised that he had noticed. Simon explained how he had seen his wallet flying out of his pocket when the books fell, and Cindy seemed impressed, believing Kizan had to be full of kids like him. She eagerly anticipated starting school and competing with Simon. Playfully, she declared herself the winner when she finally returned his wallet. Cindy was overjoyed at the prospect of going to school with Simon and couldn't wait to see him for the next 3 years. Lorraine, who had just returned, asked about the girl and whether he'd already made a friend. Simon hesitated slightly, and Lorraine misunderstood his uncertainty, winking and teasing him to be less shameless and not to act like a stranger when they met at school. Lorraine winked and assured him that he shouldn't be so embarrassed, he could be honest with her. Simon didn't display much emotion and Lorraine soon lost interest in the conversation. She then mentioned they needed to leave since they had found all the books they needed and it was time to pack them into a bag. Simon looked at his bag and at the substantial pile of books, feeling somewhat overwhelmed. Lorraine saw his expression and understood his concern. She explained that he needed a different bag, one used by necromancers known as a magical inventory, often called subspace. Simon was captivated by the idea of this incredible bag. They headed to another store where they were greeted by a kind elderly lady, who was likely the store owner. She knew that Lorraine had recently acquired a special bag and inferred that it was time for Simon to select one for himself. Lorraine confirmed the lady's guess but added that Simon was a beginner, so he should choose a bag with fewer restrictions. Approaching a display case, Lorraine read an inscription on one of the rings that served as magic bags. The inscription mentioned that subspace didn't require walls or floors, making it highly versatile for combat on open terrain. The shop owner complimented Lorraine on her excellent taste and eyesight and offered a prototype that hadn't been released to the mass market. She handed the special ring to Simon, who put it on and followed Lorraine's instructions. He felt the darkness flowing into the ring and experienced a sensation as if he had touched a handle or lever. Pulling the lever, a rectangular hole appeared in the floor. The salesperson explained that this was the latest product by Gelen Eclipse, a young master craftsman of the next generation. It could support a load of up to 4,000 pounds, open on various surfaces, and offered features like temperature control and invisibility. Lorraine inquired about how to release the bag's contents, and she was told it was included. Simon was thrilled by the bag but unsure if he could afford it. Lorraine asked the saleswoman about the price. Stephanie responded that it cost 5,000 gold coins. Simon was stunned by the price, and it exceeded his budget by a significant margin. However, Lorraine didn't seem fazed by the cost and declared that she would purchase it. This left Simon astonished that she would buy it for him. Simon was shocked that Lorraine was going to buy the bag for him, but she assured him not to worry as it wasn't her money, it was her mother's. She explained that Naftis owed a great deal to Simon's parents, so it was a way of returning the favor. Simon felt grateful but wondered how he could ever repay Naftis. Lorraine advised him not to dwell on it and simply focus on studying hard and behaving well at Kin to make her mother proud. With all the necessary supplies in hand, Lorraine insisted that they have some fun, which was part of their routine. She led him to a shooting range with toy skull targets. Simon found he had a talent for it, hitting his targets. As evening fell, they strolled through the city to an area filled with couples lighting and releasing flying lanterns, known as the Square of 1,000 Lanterns. When Lorraine asked for his opinion, Simon wondered aloud if there were truly thousands of people willing to spend 200 silver coins on a piece of flammable, oily paper. Lorraine's response wasn't exactly a compliment, and Simon felt a bit awkward. Later, they went to a waterfront restaurant for dinner. Lorraine observed that Simon's manners were quite different from hers. She inquired about his noble background, and Simon explained that his father had been strict about etiquette. Lorraine noticed that he had learned well from his parents but should know that 30% of the population of Kin are ordinary people. Therefore, he should not show his superiority over them by using his status. She started to explain to him that in Kin, there is a strict system based on merit, not on origin. Simon promised to remember that. Lorraine also asked him if he had any more questions. She also asked him if he had any more questions, as tomorrow was his first day at school. Simon remembered the girl, Cindy, whom he had met in the bookstore. She had mentioned something about majors. Lorraine beamed and explained that majors could be a tough decision for a newcomer. She began to clarify that in the first semester of the freshman year, he would have 9 courses, including 7 majors and 2 minors. Starting from the second semester, he would have the freedom to choose his own electives. When he reached the second grade, he would need to declare his chosen specialty. Simon inquired about how the girl he had met was doing, and Lorraine confirmed that he would indeed need to decide his major soon. Simon realized he had to determine his strengths and interests quickly. Lorraine advised him to focus on his core courses and put all his energy into studying them. She also mentioned that students with clear strengths tend to be more popular among peers when it comes to group assignments. Simon appreciated the advice and started considering what specialty he might choose. He mentioned his interest in sinology, and Lorraine was supportive, noting the mystical aspect of this field. Lorraine also shared information about the professors at Kin, including the legendary Professor Hongpang. Simon was excited and eager to meet these renowned educators. Their dinner passed quickly, and Lorraine escorted Simon back to his hotel, wishing him a good rest. She warned him not to be late and tired for his first day of school, or her mother would be displeased. Simon expressed his gratitude for the wonderful evening, saying he'd never forget this day. As Lorraine was about to say goodbye, she suddenly remembered something important. She needed to inform Simon that she would also be a new student at the school. Simon was shocked, and Lorraine assured him that she hoped they could be friends when they met at school. Simon was left with numerous unanswered questions as she bid him farewell. The next morning, Simon arrived at the port where their ship was set to depart. He was struck by the diverse and unique styles of the passengers around him, making him feel ordinary. When he heard the ship to Kien was about to leave, he hurried to board it. Lorraine had told him that she would take a different route to the island, so their next meeting would be at school. Simon handed his ticket to the ticket taker, and while it was being checked, he observed the ship, which was large and beautiful, but he noticed it was moored with its bow facing the shore, unlike the usual practice. Meanwhile, the ticket taker confirmed that his ticket was in order, allowing Simon to proceed. He thanked the ticket taker but was momentarily distracted by a commotion nearby. A young man was vehemently arguing with another ticket taker at a different entrance to the ship, insisting that he was number one on the waiting list and demanding to know why he hadn't received an invitation. The man was becoming increasingly angry, clenching his fists, and shouting for someone to contact Synovia, insisting it was a mistake. A bystander informed Simon that such incidents were a common occurrence each year, where some students couldn't accept the results. The young man, identified as Lucius Carroll, heir to a county in the Kingdom of Dresda, continued to express his anger. He demanded contact with the headquarters, but the ticket taker, who was not showing him on the list of accepted students, asked him to leave. This only further enraged Lucius, and he even made threatening gestures towards the ticket taker. Simon intervened, calmly asking Lucius to stop. Lucius demanded to know who Simon was, but Simon gave him a stern, unyielding look and firmly gripped his arm, causing it to audibly crack. Lucius screamed in pain and threatened Simon. The situation was already drawing attention, and a gray-haired man in a formal suit, Professor Cage, approached. He was wielding a cane and was known to be their professor. The confrontation immediately ceased as everyone turned their attention to him. Professor Cage asked Lucius if he had any last words, and Lucius frantically pleaded for urgent contact with Nephthys. The professor, aware that Lucius was first on the waiting list but also that he had not been selected, snapped his fingers, causing blood to spray from Lucius, leaving him in a pool of blood. The professor declared that they had no time to waste, instructing all the students to board the ship. He then turned to Simon and told him to board as well. Simon couldn't refuse, and Professor Cage was the first to board the ship. Students began to whisper about the incident, wondering if it was a form of dark magic. Simon couldn't help but feel sorry for the prideful and unfortunate Lucius, pondering whether he was still alive. The professor, before moving forward, reassured Simon that Lucius was still breathing. As everyone boarded, the gangway creaked open by itself. All the students were aboard, and the professor personally checked their presence. Afterward, he asked everyone to sit and remain seated, explaining that he was preparing a spell. The students watched in awe as he cast the spell, creating a magical barrier around the ship. The professor informed them that the ship might encounter turbulence during the journey and requested that they remain seated until his next announcement. Simon sat down and couldn't help but wonder how this ship would make it to Kien. He couldn't see what was happening outside. The professor's spell had enveloped the ship, leaving Simon to believe that they might need to reverse somehow to sail out to sea. The professor instructed them to keep going, and all the students heard a loud plop into the water. Someone suggested it was a large wave hitting the ship, but they were informed that the sound was too loud. Suddenly, a massive whale leaped out of the water right above the ship, startling everyone. They were shocked and couldn't understand where this whale had come from. It appeared as though it was about to crush them, but the whale opened its mouth wide and swallowed the entire ship with the frightened students inside. This enormous whale was an underwater undead creature that obeyed Kien's commands. It was a whale from the underworld, and upon closer inspection, one could see that it was a colossal skeleton with a shell. Inside its stomach, there was a significant amount of debris and other garbage. The students realized they were inside the whale, making it a monster that traveled the world's oceans, attacking any port directed by Qian. Once a year, it served as the high-speed transportation method for Qian's new students. Their journey concluded as the ship docked at a floating island. The students were amazed by the beauty of the island, especially considering they had been inside a whale's stomach. It appeared that people lived on the island as well. A fellow student named Rowan approached Simon and complimented him on his handling of the incident at the port. Simon was initially confused, but then understood that Rowan was referring to their earlier altercation. He humbly replied that it was nothing special. Rowan introduced himself as another new student and asked about Simon's entrance exam. Simon hesitated and ultimately decided to lie, describing a similar exam involving changing the shape of darkness. Rowan was pleased with this coincidence, and as they conversed, an official announcement echoed over the loudspeakers above, instructing all students to return to the ship. They were almost at their destination, and Simon couldn't believe how quickly they had arrived. As they climbed back onto the ship, Simon noticed something unusual. The water around them began to grow increasingly turbulent. All the students headed down into the hold, but the professor remained on the deck. The waves were getting larger by the minute, prompting the professor to create another protective barrier around the ship. The students had been warned that the journey might become a bit bumpy before they arrived, so they clung tightly to their seats and were instructed not to stand under any circumstances. Their ship was tossed around like a toy amidst other debris on the tumultuous waves, sending students and their suitcases airborne. They were advised to hold onto the railings to avoid injury and to brace for any sudden jolts. Simon struggled to keep his grip on his seat. Then, there was a sudden impact and a blinding flash, momentarily blinding him. Their ship shot out of the water like a cork from a bottle, offering a breathtaking view of the entire island from above. Simon gazed out the window in awe while his new friend marveled at the experience. Meanwhile, Professor Cage maintained control of the magic barrier mentally. As the ship rapidly descended towards the ground, the barrier prevented it from falling as fast as it would under normal gravity. The ship eventually hit the water with a resounding crash, but thanks to the barrier, it remained intact. They were now at the pier, and the students were informed that they had arrived in Qian. The students lined up at the metal gate with guards, and they were told to form lines of 4. Each student was given a uniform and informed that the locker rooms for boys and girls were separate. They had 5 minutes to change, and then they were asked to wait outside. Simon was delighted with his new uniform and quickly put it on, admiring himself in the mirror. He appreciated its stylish design, just as his father had mentioned, making it suitable even for formal banquets. As the students discussed the uniform's properties, they learned that it had a magical spell enhancing its durability, making it stronger than ordinary armor in battle. They were urged to exit the locker rooms quickly, and as the boys emerged, they gazed in awe at the girls coming out from the other side. It appeared that the girls' uniforms were of higher quality than theirs. The students were then led to the main auditorium. As Simon began to relax a bit, Rowan ran up behind him, shouting in delight about how great Simon looked. He couldn't contain his excitement and repeatedly asked if this was really happening. Everyone around them gave Rowan curious looks, as if he were a strange character they felt sorry for. Simon responded quietly and somewhat bewildered, reassuring Rowan that it was indeed real. After a while, Simon asked if all the people around them were new students, as there seemed to be a large number of them. Rowan confirmed that they were all first-year students, numbering 1,000. Simon was astonished, unable to believe there were so many. Rowan explained that the number would decrease significantly in the second and third grades, with only about 300 in the second year and less than 50 in the third year. This strict selection process meant that only a fraction of the initial students would make it to the second grade, reflecting the intense competition. Rowan pointed out some promising students worth watching, including Cine Dark, the official heir to the Ivory Tower, and other rising stars like Darwin Carine and Jay Sanders. Simon noticed a giant guy in the front row who was blocking the view for those behind him. Rowan identified him as Chatelmaire, a semi-giant likely specializing in magical combat. Simon was then directed to a girl across the hall who was undeniably the most capable student in the entire class, Lorena Rold. She was an acquaintance of Simon's, and while many assumed she had been admitted on special terms due to being Nephthys' daughter, Rowan had heard that she had taken the entrance exam and excelled. She wasn't listed as the first or second student to take the test, but it was already widely known that she was the top student in the class. A teacher took the stage, asking for the students' attention, and formally began the ceremony. The professor congratulated the new students on their enrollment and continued with an inspiring speech, urging them to excel in their studies. He cautioned them to be very careful and not venture into the local forest. Next, they were introduced to the professors who would be teaching in the first class, all of them legendary masters in the field of necromancy. Simon couldn't help but exclaim with joy, recognizing all of them from magazines. They were introduced to Professor Beale, who smiled and waved to the students. Professor Beale smiled and waved to everyone, while another professor in the background appeared quite weary of the ceremonies. Simon joined in the applause for the introduced professors, though he couldn't help but wonder why Nephthys, the distinguished chancellor, wasn't present. It seemed unlikely she would attend such a routine event for newcomers. Simon imagined it would be an honor to meet her, even in the third grade, if that was ever possible. The host continued to lead the ceremony, announcing that the student representatives would now take the oath of office. All the students were asked to stand up from their seats. As they rose, Simon inquired if this was the final part of the ceremony. Rowan replied that it was, and that the top two students, one male and one female, would step forward to take the oath. The presenter proceeded to call the names of the students who would come to the podium. The second best student was Serene Dark, and she walked to the podium, receiving admiring gazes from the students. Then, the number one student was announced, Simon Felina. Simon was initially unaware that his name had been called, and a hush fell over the vast hall. The host even inquired if Simon Felina was present, and it dawned on Simon like a lightning bolt. If you liked this video, comment and don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. Goodbye.